China is currently Africa's largest trading partner. Sensing the Chinese challenge, the U.S. have created a new investment fund of $60 billion for projects in the developing world, including Africa. China is currently Africa's largest trading partner. Sensing the Chinese challenge, the U.S. have created a new investment fund of $60 billion for projects in the developing world, including Africa.
Combined Joint Task Force, Horn of Africa, and base personnel from Camp Lemonnier send more than 20 joint service members to man displays and participate in the event.
For the Combined Joint Task Force, Horn of Africa, one of our main goals is to build relationships with all of our African partners across East Africa. That partnership is more important here in Djibouti than it is anywhere else.
In their strategies in Africa, the U.S. and China couldn't be further apart. Beijing focuses on diplomacy, massive infrastructure projects, and accompanying loans. Washington emphasizes direct investment in African companies and arms sales.
The Chinese have a different perspective about development. And that perspective is that if you focus first on economic development, if you build infrastructure, if you create jobs, if you generate investment, that over time standards will rise, governance will improve, democracy may develop. In the West, we have a different perspective. We think countries should look at the example that we set in America, wealthy country with very good standards and a strong democracy, vibrant. We think if countries adopt those things first, that will help them develop economically.
But that may be changing. The unlikely flashpoint has been a small country in East Africa, Djibouti. Djibouti's location has led several countries to build overseas military bases there, including both the U.S. and, as of last summer, China. Tensions flared in May when the U.S. accused China of aiming military-grade lasers at pilots landing at Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti. Beijing denied the accusations. Now U.S. senators are ringing the alarm bells over a potential takeover of a key port. In a letter to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Secretary of Defense James Mattis, Senators Marco Rubio and Chris Coons expressed concern that the Chinese ownership of a Dorale container terminal would give Beijing a critical strategic advantage. They wrote, "We believe these developments provide major strategic benefits to China and risk undermining the balance of power in East Africa." Rubio and Coons pushed for an official U.S. response to the moves in East Africa. U.S. legislators are also looking to update how the U.S. approaches development aid, and that could lead to changes in Africa. In October, Congress passed the Better Utilization of Investments Leading to Development Act. That legislation creates a new development agency with a $60 billion budget. It would also have a new authority to make equity investments, a strategy long used by China. But as direct competition between China and the U.S. heats up, the question remains, what's in it for Africa? I'm Salam Solomon, VOA News, Washington, D.C.
Interesting to see that number, $60 billion, and where the U.S. and China are choosing to spend that money.
A lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, a clear example of primacy is Niger Republic. So you have the U.S. on one hand with the third largest military base in Niger Republic, and on the other you have China with Soraz Refinery. Two different approaches. Yeah. But in my opinion, I do think that China has an upper hand just because of its diplomatic approach in giving this aid to Africa, because what it is doing, it's helping Africa manage these funds by building infrastructures for Africa. However, there are analysts who have criticized what the U.S. and China's presence in Africa as another form of colonization, because they feel like that's another way of getting them, it's another way of encouraging dependency.
Yeah, it probably could, but what I'm seeing is that first, this new initiative by the U.S. Being introduced into Africa is that, to me, it's not really new, because it's still, just like the old one, it still relies on U.S. companies deciding to go invest in Africa, and that could take ages. I mean, for the companies to negotiate deals with African leaders who are ready for these legacy projects, and so you can really see that, you know, it's probably not going to make as much impact as Chinese money is making it right now.
The U.S. has with Djibouti. and for U.S. service members to participate in a cultural exchange with Djiboutians.
We have an excellent partnership, and this partnership has started basically at the founding of the country in 1977. We recognized them right away. We've been working with them closely ever since, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. I think it's only going to get stronger.
Djiboutians leapt at the chance to also display their culture and show the warmth and friendliness of the Djiboutian people.
Djibouti is a country really open-armed that she say to a lot of countries like Ethiopia, like Japan, and also like America, to come to Djibouti, see the culture, and also show the local people the other culture, the culture that they don't know, and the difference between what they see on TV and what they're gonna see today.
We know the importance of being able to interact with the community, with the host country, and so this is a wonderful opportunity for Djiboutians to see some of the culture, some of the history, some of the art that we have in America. Djibouti has been a very nice country, and the people are very nice.
That is
Secondly,
true.
I mean, you see that China is coming in with a slick politic in terms of, you know, no strings attached. I mean, we'll see
Very
later
clever.
on, you know, if there's no strings attached at all. But I think what it's really saying to Africans is that they're not preoccupied by the regime change, which, you know, the Western world is known for. I mean, we remember the Arab Spring, we remember Libya, which is, you know, for me, the most recent regime change that went wrong. And, you know, it's not a secret. Even President Barack Obama admitted to it being a failure, that they failed to plan properly. And so a lot of African leaders still remember that regime change situation and not wanting that. And so Chinese government is really playing with our politics, and I think they're clever with it and might work.
Yeah, you know, I think the biggest difference between China and the U.S. is China sees Africa as a business partner. I think they see a lot of potential in Africa, whereas the U.S. for the longest time has seen Africa as a problem to fix. And even in some cases, a charity case even. And I think that the BUILD Act changes that. It allows the U.S. to be a little more competitive on the continent. That competition is good for Africa, because if you realize, Africans have everything. We have resources. We have oil. We have diamonds. We have enough food to feed the entire world. Even.
I agree.
And I think that China and the U.S. are seeing that, and hopefully the Africans will realize that they have the negotiation power. You know, I'm struck. I was struck when President Trump told African leaders. He said, you know. He said, I have so many friends going to countries trying to get rich. And I hope that African governments realize that there are people going to Africa trying to get rich. We have the upper hand.
That's right. We must negotiate properly.
For sure.
We will be going to Haiti now in South Africa, which is Africa's largest partner, to give us a view of what's going on there.
Well, here, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has sent a team of economic envoys around the world to rack up foreign investment to the tune of $100 billion over the next 5 years. The South Africans are confident they can reach that target within 2 years. They say that's because they're looking at investment from just about everywhere. Asia, the Middle East, Europe, the United States, Canada, everywhere they can get it. They say they're not turning their backs on the West in favor of China. They're simply looking at all the investment options on the table. But it is important to note that many other African countries do not have those same options. Many African leaders, they say they need the investment, they need the infrastructure in their countries, and China seems to be stepping up to the plate in that regard. And look, the West spells a lot of uncertainty right now in the European Union as the UK prepares to exit that union. The EU seems increasingly fractured with that family spat going on there. The United States seems to be really pulling out of international treaties, of international pacts, with its America First foreign policy posture. And so many African countries are left with very few choices, even as China looks to overtake the United States as the biggest economy in the world. And so if you look at the options that other African leaders might have, and if you really put yourself in their shoes, who are you going to go with? Are you going to go with a nation that is ascendant, or are you going to go with nations that are really pulling back and looking inward? Well, you know, a question I think that still needs a closer look at is exactly what are we exporting to China and what are we importing from them? Are we still exporting raw materials to China and importing finished goods from them? And where does the value add happen? Because if it's not happening in Africa and it is happening in China, where does that leave the continent? Does it leave the continent any more developed than it was to begin with? And how far does that go to really alleviating the poverty that everyday Africans are faced with? And we also want to know what you think about this. You know where to find us on social media. Tell us what you think about China's presence here. Do you think it's good, or do you think it's a bad thing for Africa? Ladies, your lightning round question today coming to you from Johannesburg, South Africa. Do you think China's increasing presence and influence on the continent helps or hurts Africa's future economic prospects?
Good question, Haiti. Here's what I think about that. I mean, I think that it could be a good, it could be a bad, but I think the way the way China's coming in aggressively bringing the infrastructure project, I think they might be a better partner for now, which is what Africa needs. Whether it be no strings attached or not, it's left to see.
I can't say for certain which country is better for Africa, but what I can say is the competition created between them is good for Africa. But Africa needs to realize that they have the negotiation power, and they need to start making deals that are good for the long run, not just the short term.
I mean, I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. It could be positive or it could be negative. It depends on what angle you look at it.